Imagine a world where survival wasn't just about being clever, but about being built to endure the impossible. Now picture standing face to face with a human who looks familiar, but not quite the same. Their skull is thicker, their brow heavier, their grip strong enough to crush bone, and their chest barrel-shaped like a furnace designed to breathe life in sub-zero winds. This was the Neanderthal, an Ice Age titan forged by nature to thrive in an environment where most of us wouldn't last a week. For decades, we pictured them as shaggy brutes, huddled in caves, grunting over fire. But the truth is far stranger and far more unsettling. They weren't just some awkward evolutionary cousins. They were superhumans of their age, molded by the cold and armed with skills that challenge everything we thought we knew about intelligence, culture, and survival. Their story begins in a quiet valley in Germany in the summer of 1856. Quarry workers, digging into the limestone cliffs, stumbled upon bones unlike anything they'd seen before. At first glance, they might have been mistaken for an animal, but the sheer thickness of the skull, the strange brow ridges, and the heavy limb bones didn't match any creature known to science. The bones were passed to Johann Karl Fuhlrott, a local schoolteacher with an eye for the extraordinary. When he examined them, he realized he was looking at something ancient, something human, but not quite us. When he presented his discovery, the reaction was anything but supportive. Scientists laughed him off, accusing him of mistaking a diseased or deformed human for a new species. Some even claimed the thick brow ridges belonged to a criminal, a brutish man twisted by hardship. But Fuhlrott held his ground, insisting these bones told a different story. And he was right. As more remains were found across Europe, a pattern emerged: stocky frames, thick bones, massive faces. It became impossible to deny. Another branch of humanity had once walked this earth, and they weren't weak. They were monsters of endurance. Look closely at their anatomy, and you'll see why. Their skulls were so dense and sloped that many researchers have compared them to natural helmets, designed to withstand impacts. Their brains were slightly larger than ours on average, shaped differently, with an emphasis on spatial awareness and visual processing, skills vital for navigating dark forests or stalking prey in icy twilight. Their noses were enormous, wider and taller than ours, with deep nasal cavities that acted as internal heaters, warming the freezing air before it reached their lungs. This wasn't some random quirk. It was survival engineering at its finest. Their jaws were built like vices, with teeth so large and so worn that scientists know they used them as tools. Imagine holding animal hides between your teeth while cutting, pulling with your mouth as your hands worked the blade. That was daily life for them. Their teeth were their third hand, polished down from constant use. And then you get to their bodies, and this is where the scale of their strength becomes clear. They were shorter than us on average, usually around 5.5 feet, but their torsos were wide, compact, and heavy. Their rib cages expanded outward like bellows, their pelvises flared for stability, and their arms and legs were thicker than those of most modern athletes. Their bones rivaled those of Olympic lifters, but unlike us, this wasn't the result of training. It was their default state. They carried injuries like trophies, broken ribs, cracked skulls, shattered limbs, and most of them healed, meaning they survived blows that would cripple or kill us today. They weren't built for speed. They were built for endurance, for close combat, for wrestling giant animals to the ground. Everything about their biology screams one thing. Neanderthals weren't fragile humans. They were Ice Age tanks. Now imagine their world. Step into Europe 40,000 years ago. Endless tundra stretched under gray skies, glaciers cutting through the landscape, winds so cold they burned skin. The animals roaming these plains were not the kind you'd find in a zoo. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, giant elk, and cave bears the size of cars dominated the land. And predators like saber-toothed cats lurked in the shadows, waiting for the weak to fall behind. This was not a place where mistakes were forgiven. Yet Neanderthals didn't just exist here. They thrived. Fire was their greatest ally, but not in the way you might imagine. They didn't sit waiting for lightning to strike or hope to stumble upon flames. They controlled it. They kept embers alive for days, even weeks, carrying them in bark or bone containers to relight fires wherever they traveled. They built stone hearths to protect their flames from the wind, and they experimented with fuels, using not just wood, but bone and dried dung when resources ran low. Fire wasn't just warmth. It was survival. But fire alone wasn't enough. They had strategy. Neanderthals hunted in tight-knit groups, their methods closer to coordinated ambushes than random chases. They didn't have long-range weapons like bows, so they drove animals into ravines, off cliffs, or into traps, then closed in with wooden spears to finish the kill. This meant brutal, up-close combat, which explains the countless broken bones we see in their remains. But behind that violence, there's something deeply human. Because when injuries struck, they didn't abandon each other. Some Neanderthals lived years with crippling wounds, blindness, or withered limbs. They only survived because their group cared for them, fed them, and protected them. This wasn't a species of savages. It was a species of caretakers. Their camps show signs of structure, specific areas for fire, for tool-making, for butchering animals. Some even show windbreaks made from mammoth bones or stone walls, suggesting they built primitive shelters to shield themselves from the storm. This was no desperate struggle for life. It was innovation, resilience, and teamwork. They adapted, endured, and dominated their environment for nearly 300,000 years. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. And that's where their story begins to shift from brute strength to something far more surprising. Because Neanderthals, for all their power, weren't just fighters. They were thinkers. They were builders. And as we look closer at their lives, the line between them and us becomes thinner than anyone expected. If you're fascinated by this hidden side of human history, stay tuned, because in the next part, we'll dive into their intelligence, their culture, and the haunting mysteries that make Neanderthals more human than we ever imagined. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what's the most surprising thing you've learned so far about these Ice Age survivors? Don't forget to subscribe to Prehistoric Medievals so you never miss the next chapter in this story. Their intelligence wasn't the kind that left behind skyscrapers or written records, but when you look at the evidence, you begin to realize that Neanderthals were not only surviving the Ice Age, they were shaping it to their advantage. Their brains were, on average, slightly larger than ours, but the difference wasn't just size. The way their brains were organized gave them extraordinary spatial awareness and razor-sharp motor control. That meant they could track prey across difficult terrain, remember complex landscapes, and coordinate movements with precision. Their survival demanded clarity of vision and quick decisions, and their brains delivered. While their capacity for complex language may have been more limited than ours, their intelligence was expressed in other ways that challenge the old stereotype of them as primitive grunters. Take Shanidar Cave in Iraq, where one of the most remarkable discoveries reshaped our view of these people. The skeleton of a Neanderthal man was found with injuries that should have ended his life: blindness in one eye, a crushed leg, a withered arm. And yet he lived for years after. That could only have happened if others cared for him, fed him, protected him. This wasn't just survival. This was compassion. It was community. That same cave also gave us evidence of burials, not careless disposals, but deliberate placements of the dead. Some graves even contained traces of pollen, suggesting flowers may have been laid alongside the body. Imagine that. Tens of thousands of years ago, humans who weren't even our direct ancestors were mourning their dead, expressing emotion in a way we once thought belonged only to us. But burial wasn't the only sign of a deeper culture. In Spanish caves, long before Homo sapiens ever arrived in the region, Neanderthals painted red symbols on walls, abstract markings that can only be interpreted as early art. They shaped long wooden spears, hardened them with fire, and crafted specialized stone tools with remarkable precision. They scraped animal hides to make clothing, processed pigments, and may have even decorated themselves with shells stained by colored minerals. These weren't the mindless brutes of old cartoons. These were humans with creativity, identity, and perhaps even ritual. And yet, as impressive as their intelligence was, there's a darker, more unsettling side. Archaeologists have uncovered Neanderthal bones showing clear signs of cannibalism. Long bones split open to extract marrow, skulls cracked and scorched in fire, cuts made by stone tools on human remains. In some cases, these weren't animals, they were each other. Whether it was a desperate measure during times of famine or part of some ritual, we may never know for sure. But it's a chilling reminder that their lives were as complex and messy as our own. They experimented with survival, with healing, even with the boundaries of morality. Dental plaque analysis shows traces of bitter plants like yarrow and chamomile, plants with no nutritional value but medicinal properties. One individual even had chemical traces from poplar bark, which contains the active ingredient in aspirin. They weren't just eating what was in front of them. They were observing, experimenting, and treating illness. That's not primitive. That's human. For almost 300,000 years, Neanderthals thrived in Europe and Asia, holding their ground against an unforgiving climate. And then, about 40,000 years ago, they vanished. Theories abound. Climate change brought abrupt swings that devastated ecosystems. Their small population size may have made them vulnerable to disease and inbreeding. But perhaps the most compelling theory is the arrival of us, Homo sapiens. We carried lighter frames, more efficient tools, and larger social networks. Maybe we competed directly, out-hunting them, outbreeding them, and overwhelming their numbers. Or maybe the story isn't one of replacement, but of absorption. Because here's the twist: Neanderthals didn't disappear entirely. Genetic studies show that if you're of non-African descent, you carry between 2 and 4% Neanderthal DNA. That means pieces of their immune system, their adaptations, even fragments of their brain chemistry live on inside you right now. They're not gone. They're part of us. When you put the pieces together, the image of Neanderthals changes completely. They weren't failures of evolution. They weren't some primitive dead end. They were strong, intelligent, compassionate, and adaptable. True superhumans of the Ice Age. Their disappearance wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of ours. Because without them, without their struggles, their resilience, and even their mixing with us, humanity would not be what it is today. Neanderthals were not just our cousins. They were mirrors, showing us another version of what it means to be human. So the next time you hear the word caveman, remember this. You're not just hearing about some distant, extinct relative. You're hearing about family. A family whose bloodline still runs through your veins, whose legacy is written in your very DNA. If this story of the Neanderthals shook the way you see human history, let me know in the comments. Do you think they disappeared because of us? Or do you believe they live on in us? Don't forget to hit subscribe to Prehistoric Medievals, because this is just one chapter in the hidden history of humanity, and there are countless more waiting to be uncovered.